The crucifixion. Tom, this is such an important topic.
It is, Kevin, and when we think about the gap between the life we live and the life we long to live, at the heart of that gap is love. All of us long to be loved, and there's good reason, because our story begins with a loving God who creates us in love with love in mind. And Genesis 1 and 2 have this wonderful picture of love that is truly right between God and us and between one another and creation. So we have this beautiful picture of being loved and a beautiful picture of attachment, because all of us long to be attached from cradle to grave, to be truly loved. But then what happens in Genesis 3? And this is the tragedy of this disintegration. And at the heart of disintegration is relationships that disintegrate. And at the heart of that is where love disintegrates. And we become detached from God and from others in creation. And the good story, again, of our rescue is it addresses that detachment, that we are truly loved.
Yeah, Bill, how have you seen this longing to be loved or attached?
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel this in my own life, and I think all of us do, that we long to be loved, we long to be accepted, to really be known, and yet there's this deep fear that if people were really to know us, if they were really to know all of the junk inside of our hearts, the shame, the fear, our weaknesses, things that we've done that we're not proud of, our thoughts, that if someone were to really know that, to really know the real me, that there's no way that they could love me, that they would reject me, that they would walk away. And so we put up walls, we hide, we're never quite able to show people the real us. And yet we still have this deep longing to be accepted, to be loved, and we find ourselves hiding. Yeah.
Yeah, Tommy hinted at it, that the Christian story responds to this longing to be loved and the detachment.
Yeah, our rescuer is one of love, and the grandest demonstration of love is the crucifixion. And we see this so powerfully stated in Paul's letter to the Corinthians. He captures this wonderful demonstration of love and rescuing us. And it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. And it says, He, God the Father, made him, God the Son, who knew no sin, to be sin on our behalf, that we might be the very righteousness of God. And sometimes we hear righteousness, we think self-righteousness and religion is stuffy, but just imagine that picture as restoration of Genesis 1 and 2, the life we long to live, that Jesus came so that we could live this life, so we could have this kind of love and this attachment. And I love this picture. I kind of call it the great swap, guys. I mean, it's this picture of God's perfect righteousness and his love, and he exchanges it with our messes, right? So he takes our detachment and switches it with his attachment. And it's centered in the cross. The cross makes it possible for God's love, his amazing love for us, and his holiness to be satisfied as Jesus is our substitute there.
Yeah, this great swap is sometimes in theological terms referred to as substitutionary atonement.
Big word.
Right, yeah, big word, two big words, right, yeah. That are sometimes lost, the meaning, the intent, or what's there. Spend a little time talking about substitutionary atonement. And on the other side of that, throughout church history, there have been those who have pushed against the idea, that have said that, not liked the idea that God, a wrathful God, would put that penalty on his son. What do we lose if we lose substitutionary atonement?
Yeah, at the heart of the story, of the scriptural story, is the substitutionary atonement. Without it, we really have an incoherent story from creation to consummation. And what we see in the substitutionary atonement is that God satisfies both his infinite love and his wrath. So people have said that the cross is where his love and mercy meet. All of God's attributes are satisfied in an integral way on the cross in shedding his blood for us. And so what that does, at least for me, is it helps me understand that God is coherent himself, that the story is coherent, and that when he died for me, he satisfied his absolute holy requirement, and he paid the penalty for our sin, because sin matters, and it has to be dealt with.
Yeah, so it's both love and justice, right?
Exactly.
A just God who's...
And if we don't have the substitutionary atonement, we lose justice. All of us cry out for justice, right? We see the errors in the world, the sin in our life, the difficulties in the world, and we say, something has to be done. This wrong needs to be made right. And without the cross, that's an incoherent idea.
Yeah, and I think that if we lose the justice piece, if it's only his love, and this is oftentimes what's emphasized on the cross as well, it's just a demonstration of God's love. It's just an example of how much he loves us. But there's no justice being done here. It actually makes the cross a horrible thing, because for me to say to my wife, Rachel, I love you so much, let me jump from a bus to show you. that's a terrible thing. She'd be horrified by that. But on the other hand, if she had tripped and fallen into the road, a bus is coming, I throw her out of the way, and I rescue her, and I'm hit in the process, that's a great act of love, a great demonstration of love. And so without the justice, the cross actually becomes this gruesome, horrible thing that doesn't make any sense.
Bill, I love the language of rescue, because you rescuing Rachel reminds us that the rescuer, right, came to this earth. And without the substitutionary atonement, we don't need to be rescued from anything.
Right.
So again, back to our coherence of our story, our rescuer rescues us from something very important, and the cross makes that happen.
Bill, what are the implications of the crucifixion for us, just in our everyday life?
Yeah. I mean, there's massive implications, because along with the resurrection, I mean, this is the turning point in history. This is the hinge for every part of our lives and our future. But there's a couple things that I always think of when I think of implications around the crucifixion. And the first one is that it actually affirms this sense of unacceptability that we all feel. It actually gives a basis, a reality for that, because the cross says there is something to be dealt with, that we were so bad off, that we were so rebellious, that we were so broken, we're so flawed, that it takes the God of the universe coming, taking on flesh, becoming a human being, dying this gruesome, awful death on the cross, being separated from his Father, that's what it took. So there is something deeply wrong with us. But at the same time that it's saying we're unacceptable, it's making a way for us to be acceptable. It's offering the way of forgiveness, of wholeness, of healing, of transformation, of forgiveness that removes that guilt and shame in a permanent way. I mean, Jesus says that as he's dying on the cross, that it is finished, it's done, and that forgiveness has happened, and that it's available to each and every one of us, that frees us from that guilt and shame that causes us to hide.
Bill, I love, Kevin, I love also that paradox of the cross. We often see that in the story, don't we? Where at the intersection of the cross, that love reflects both our unacceptability and acceptability to God, that we are so deeply loved.
In one moment.
Yeah, in one moment. And the cross is the ultimate exclamation point that we are loved.
Yeah. So Bill, as we wrap up, what's something in this session that you'd want to make sure the listeners, the people watching, make sure they don't miss?
Yeah, I think the one thing I wouldn't want us to miss here is that when the story of the gospel, when the reality of the crucifixion and all that it means begins to work its way into our lives and deep into our hearts, what we find is that it produces a deep humility and this sort of unshakable confidence. It's so rare to have those two things together, because the cross simultaneously tells us we're so deeply flawed, it took God dying for us, and yet that we're so deeply loved that he was glad to do it. Tim Keller uses this language of that it affirms us to the stars and it humbles us to dirt at the same time. And so when this gets into your life, it changes the way, for example, you experience both criticism and affirmation, because you can get criticized, but it doesn't crush you any longer, because you know how deeply loved you are. So it's never fun to receive criticism, but it doesn't crush you anymore because you know you have this unshakable love. At the same time, you can receive affirmation, you can appreciate it, but it never makes you arrogant, because you know how broken you are and what it took to rescue you. And so it produces this deeply attractive humility and confidence that allows us actually to be free from guilt and shame and to really enjoy life and to focus on other people, to forget about ourselves.